It really changes the focus of a company to go ahead and replicate what they already did instead of innovate what they already have. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about 10 issues with import guitars. Every wave! Hey! Now, I did a video called 10 Issues with US made guitars, and you can check that video out by clicking in the description down below and clicking on the video. And more importantly, a lot of you really enjoyed that video, and I already had planned to do a counter argument to that video. And that's the whole point of this. I just want to show all the things that you guys have talked about and things that I echo when I agree with you about what we've talked about here as a community on the channels. So let's get into it with number 10. There's 1,000 brands and no choices. Now, I know I'm exaggerating when I say 1,000 brands, but really we know what I'm talking about. You go to a store and they say they have 50 different brands, but when you go there, you feel like you only have about 3 to 4 different choices. I once had a friend at the NAMM show with me and he said, man, there's so many guitars here. And I said, yeah, tell me all the guitars you see that are not like the 4 main guitars. And at the end of the show, he said, you know, I probably walked about 200 booths and only saw about 7 different guitars. And that brings us to number 9, which is saturation in the supply. One of the great things about import products is that you can get a huge volume. We see it with toaster ovens to toothbrushes and everything in between. However, in the guitar community, it's not a big community. So the fact that they're doing so much volume and having to hit that volume to keep those factories going means we're oversaturating the market. And we see it constantly. We see companies really having a trouble holding a price line. And it's been getting worse over the last few decades. And I don't think it's going to continue to get better. In other words, no matter what the demand seems to be, the manufacturing level is always going to have to maintain if they're going to do mass-produced instruments at this level. Number 8 is probably the most talked about anytime I do a review or talk about an import guitar. It's human rights violations. Now, one thing I want to tell you before you get all hot and bothered and putting comments in there, you know, you should do your own due diligence and go out there and see what companies are working in the hotspots. It's not hard to figure out what factories have had problems in the past and what factories are making what brands. And it's something that deeply saddens the majority of us to know that people are not treated either fairly or with cruelty. One thing that I feel that I don't think is very accurate is a lot of people seem to assign, and that means customers, seem to assign the price of the guitar as the equalization of the cruelty or mistreatment of the employees or the people. In other words, if the cheaper the guitar, the worse they're treated. That's not the case. In fact, you can check online. There's all kinds of regulations about how people are supposed to be treated and how American companies or US companies and European companies are supposed to be working with those manufacturers. There's a danger to assigning that kind of logic to this because there has been cases where actually relatively expensive import guitars have been linked to pretty bad situations with the employees, and vice versa, where some inexpensive guitars actually treated their employees very fairly. But more importantly, demand that from the manufacturer. If you're buying an import guitar and you want to know if people were treated fairly, you can ask for all that information from the manufacturer. Now, I know you're going to argue that they could lie about it, but at least if they're on the record with it, they're on the record with it. Number 7, import guitars drive US prices up. And what I mean by that is it's not as easy as taking an import guitar and then saying this is how much it costs to make and this is how much the customer is going to pay. A lot of times a big factor of it is what percentage of discount is it from its higher end competitor. In other words, its own internal model. A good example would be using a Fender US Stratocaster. At the time of making this video, it's about $1,500 street price, and you'll notice that the Squier import equivalent is about $350 to $400, which is about 25%. Some models will be as low as 20% and some as high as 30% of the price, but that's the equation. Sometimes if the price of the import guitar has to go up a little bit, then the US one has to go up to keep that equation going. So what you'll notice is no matter where the prices are set, they stay in that percentage mark no matter what they do. Number 6 is probably one of my biggest issues with import guitars when I do have issues with them, which is you never know what you're getting. Working on import guitars has taught me a lot over the years, and one of the things is they're not always what they say they are. In fact, you'll notice that a huge amount of import guitars have disclaimers in the websites of those companies and in the catalogs that say materials and specifications subject to change without notification. That's something that you don't see too much everywhere else, but it is seen some other places as well, so I don't want to just pigeonhole them that. But what I'm saying is that they'll change woods or specifications and you not know it. But more importantly, I like sharing this story. I once had a guitar come in and for repair, and it was a mahogany body with a maple cap. Not a maple veneer, it had a full maple cap. We took the pickups out, and when we took the pickups out, we noticed that the maple cap, where it wasn't painted, wasn't maple. It was all mahogany at the top. We contacted the manufacturer, and they told us that this was not the first time they had heard that. The other thing I've seen too is where they've changed out materials of the quality of the components, and even tuning keys and pickups. In fact, so much so, we've even seen where some import guitars are shipping with brand name strings, but then later we found out they were actually copies or fakes of those brand name strings, but the manufacturer that ordered the guitars didn't know about it. So it's a little loose whenever you decide to basically allow somebody to build your product but not put their name on it, your names on it, their accountability goes down, and so therefore they're going to do some strange, shady things. Number 5 is replication instead of innovation. Many US guitar manufacturers have told me that more than 50 to 60% of their gross sales are coming from their import divisions. When you have an entire industry focused on its biggest profit is going to be the import market, and the import market is basically taking the thing that you made and copying it, you're going to see all your revenue and resources going into replication instead of innovation. And so I think that's one of the driving forces that we see in our industry, where you see a lot of guitar companies really not doing some exciting stuff anymore. When you look at some of the parts on a guitar, they haven't been changed in 50 years, and it's mainly because the resources are spent trying to find manufacturers make those components less expensive than actually making new higher end or better alternatives to them. And so that's one of the downfalls of import guitars, is that it really changes the focus of a company to go ahead and replicate what they already did instead of innovate what they already have. Before we get to number 4, I just wanted to say thank you to my patrons for making videos like this possible. If you want to support this channel, not only can you become a patron, but you can also support the channel by buying merch down below or just subscribing and hitting the like button. All of those things make it possible to make content like this. Number 4 is definitely my issue, which is the hypocrisy of it all. One of the things that I've pointed out in many videos in the past that I obviously don't agree with is that in the US and the European Union, there is all kinds of laws that are there to protect the environment, the employees, and of course us as consumers. And one of the things that really frustrates me as a consumer, as a customer of these manufacturers, is that they can go overseas and have those products made without having to abide by those laws and import them in. And so, you know, for the record, you can actually find an article with Hartley Peavy talking about the fact that the US will not allow him to make guitars in the US. And what he means by that is they put so many restrictions and so many laws on him and how he had to build his factory and update it that he said it's physically impossible, and that he can just build guitars overseas and have them shipped over. Now, so you know, because I don't want anyone to think that Hartley was advocating for that, he was actually upset about it. It was a very passionate article where he said basically the US has forced him to do something because he can't afford to update a factory to the regulations they put out for him, but he can import those guitars from factories that don't have those regulations. And I think that's the heart of what we're talking about, is that one of the things that makes those import guitars less expensive is there is violations to the environment and violations to the employees and violations to the consumers that basically get unchecked or unnoticed when they're overseas. And what's interesting about all of that is that if you can imagine, if they were to go ahead and say, look, these are the ways we want people treated, these are the way we want the environment and the consumers treated, and it doesn't matter where you make it on the planet Earth, to make a product and get it into these countries, you have to follow those rules, you would notice a big change in the import market. And speaking of violating laws, that brings me to number 3, which is knockoffs and fakes. Knockoffs and fakes, for a large part, are made in the factories that are making the real guitars. And companies try to protect their intellectual properties all the time. They send product to these manufacturers, and these manufacturers are selling the same products out the back door. There was actually, a couple years ago, there was an issue where a bass manufacturer had a new line of bass amps built overseas. And before their amps were actually out the door and to the consumers, the fakes were already out. So the fakes of their product beat their product to the market, and we're seeing that more and more. And a lot of players are using that as justification to say, hey, that's why I buy the knockoffs. It's basically the same thing as the real thing, just I don't have to pay the extra price. Now, that's a logic I don't agree with, because I think intellectual properties are important, but I have to admit, a little bit of me does understand that logic, because when you play with the bull, you get the horns. In other words, if you know these companies overseas are doing these things and you're doing business with them, I don't think you should be shocked when you become a victim of it. Number 2 is not so much a grievance or a complaint as an adage. And it's a good friend of mine who's very smart and a very successful businessman said, no one works cheap forever. In other words, what he said is no matter what you do, somebody's always going to want more. And the point of that is this: as we go overseas to have these guitars made, we're noticing that the factories, the employees, and the economies based around those guitars, as they get better, want more money, and then that forces the manufacturers to keep changing where they're going. Now, eventually, the point is that you will dry this well up. So in other words, you're not going to be able to make all these inexpensive guitars forever. And that brings us to number 1. The number 1 issue I see with import guitars is longevity of how good they are. So what's interesting about that is this: guitars are made a certain way, and they've been made a certain way. And of course, we're talking about electric guitars in this video, have been made a certain way for a long period of time. Companies like Godin in Canada take 2 years to make one guitar. I know that sounds outrageous. That can't be possible. It's absolutely true, so you know. When a piece of wood comes into the factory, before that piece of wood comes out the other side of the factory is the shape of a guitar, it takes 2 years to properly dry it, process it, and get it ready to go. Because there is a process. Now, manufacturers are speeding this process up so much that I've seen guitars over in Asia manufactured in 9 days. In other words, the wood came in, they built a guitar, they painted it, they dried it, and they shipped it out in 9 days. Now, that's not the case, so don't take that as the gospel for all guitars overseas. But my point to this is that the whole point of an import guitar, or a price affordable guitar, which is basically made in an import way, is to get the price down, and one of the ways they do that is speed up the process. But what we don't know is how long they'll last. There is no proof. And if somebody says, well, I have a guitar that was made overseas or imported 20 years ago, they're not made the same way. So in other words, what I'm getting at is that the process to make these guitars is getting faster and faster, and we don't know how long they'll last. There are guitars that when they are made right, they last forever. Not 10 years or 5 years. We're not talking about blenders or cars. We're talking about things that are designed to last not only for your lifespan, but for your children's lifespan and your grandchildren's lifespan. Your guitar could last 3 and 4 generations without even missing a beat. So the point of what I'm trying to get at is that although we're making these inexpensive guitars, and that's great because it puts it in the hands of players that normally wouldn't get their access to it, but we're also walking down the same road that says these guitars might not be less expensive when we factor in how long they're going to last compared to the guitars that last forever. All right, that's it. That's my 10 things. I hope you enjoyed the video. I really hope it stirs your mind up. I hope you watch the other one and hear the counter arguments. That's the whole point of this. I put up arguments for both sides of the 10 things based on information I've learned from the industry, being in this industry myself, and more importantly from you guys and your questions and your thoughts. This is just to start a conversation about this stuff. Again, I hope you guys take this with a grain of salt. It's all supposed to be for entertainment purposes, to talk about the thing that we love so much. As you know, we're all guitar players and we love guitar here. And I think ultimately the consumers and the companies all want the same thing, which is to enjoy music together and find a way to do that. And so this is just about talking about the things that may hurt that from coming in the future or help it. So there you go. As always, I want to thank you guys so much for your time. Till the next time, know your gear.